Are you serious?
Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and you're watching The Broken Meeple. This is a YouTube channel about board games where I give reviews, top 10s and my honest opinions, regardless of the consequences. We'll get on with the show in just a minute, but first a quick word from my sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk. KIENDA stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to KIENDA and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
And thanks to KIENDA for this review copy of Age of Innovation, which is probably the most ironic title this game could have had. More on that later. But this is the effective reprint of Terra Mystica. And I say effective reprint because 90% of this game is the same as Terra Mystica. If you have played the original, you're going to know most of these rules going in. In fact, the rulebook goes as far as to have like little bits highlighted as the new rules. You can pretty much learn this game in like 10 minutes if you've already played the original. But the question is the new stuff an improvement to the game? Have they tweaked a few systems, made things better or made things worse? And is it worth you shelling out a ton of money for this game? Because, it's not the cheapest thing in the world, for a game that you kind of already have twice over. I mean, you already have Terra Mystica and Gaia Project, both games that I sort of like, but I would admit I liked them more at first and then kind of waned off them, and now I just find them kind of like, average above average. So could this be the game to win me back and bring me back into the Terra Mystica fold, or is it just the same thing? So I'm going to try and explain this overview briefly, but in the context that you have not played Terra Mystica before. What you essentially do is you take control of a faction who has its own specialization with a particular type of terrain. It's a heavy Euro game where you are trying to area control the board and build various buildings for victory points, but in doing so you have to terraform the landscape to fit your needs. So for example, if I take the felines and I happen to be good at desert, it means that I need areas to be desert in order for me to actually physically build on them, and of course everybody else is doing the same thing and getting in your way. It's very much kind of an engine builder game where you'll start off with not a lot of resources, not a lot of things you can do, but as you build more buildings, maybe upgrade them or grab certain tiles that give you bonuses and things like that, you'll be able to do more actions and do them better, and by the end of the game, of course, score up the most victory points. What would happen is that you have your player board, which will be specific to a particular type of terrain, but you'll have your faction here as well as the bonus that it receives, and all the buildings fill up these slots. So it's one of those games where you have all these buildings on your board, and when you take them off, you get more income or you get more bonuses. Stonemaier games have done that with things like Scythe and a few other games. But the idea is that on your turn you will do multiple actions until everybody has passed. The actions are somewhat plentiful in this game. I mean, you can terraform the landscape itself using shovels as a resource. You can manipulate these little purple bead strepsils effectively to create power, which generates more actions that you can use with it as another currency. You can build buildings off your board, which are workshops, merchant houses, schools, a palace, all sorts of different things like that. You can upgrade your board with sailing to go further across the waters, or make your terraforming easier, or make your power a lot better. But all of these things are stuff that everybody gets to do. But by the end of the round, there are also potential ways to score based on end of round conditions. But throughout the game, you're also leveling up 4 different technology tracks, which are essentially just tracks. But what they do is that they grant you more power, they'll grant you victory points at the end, and of course you need to do it in order to unlock certain things, such as being able to unlock city tiles near the end, or more to the point, you'll be able to grab competency tiles, which are essentially a bit like grabbing like a university seal in a sense, which again grant you special bonuses or special abilities. And of course you now have a new book resource that you didn't have in the original, which you can use to buy innovation tiles off this board, which essentially are again more abilities and more things you can do. We're going to touch on this in a little bit more detail later as to what the effect that has. But And it's kind of a general overview. By the end of the game, you're scoring points for area control and how big you've made your towns, effectively, like your cluster of buildings. But stuff you've unlocked off the board, your technology track levels, the competency tiles, the palace tiles you've grabbed, all sorts of things will score you victory points. It is a bit of a point salad, although you do have to work for said point salad. And from a if you have played Terra Mystica before, you have played the majority of this game. It just has a few tweaks, which I will mention as I go through this review.
I don't get it.
So I've kept it very brief because, frankly, I'd be here until next Tuesday if I was doing a full overview. But in terms of similar games, well, of course we're going to talk about the two that have come before it, Terra Mystica and Gaia Project. I'm not including Terra Nova or whatever that small, lightweight version was, because I don't remember many people actually talking that highly about it. And really, did you really want this to be a light game? But this is essentially more similar to Terra Mystica than Gaia Project, because Gaia Project went a little bit different with the way that it was in space and how you moved around planets, and it also did more interesting things with the technology tracks, because here the tracks are pretty bare bones, but in that one the technology tracks also unlocked other abilities that you could do better than anyone else. So that was essentially Gaia Project stick, but for the most part Gaia Project and Terra Mystica were the same game. You took a faction, it was good at a particular type of landscape or planet, and you went off and you did area control and you unlocked buildings off your board. I mean, the games are pretty much the same, just with some tweaks. Pick or choose which one is your favorite, and I think the majority tend to go with Gaia Project this day. So this one being very similar to Terra Mystica, from the games I've played of this, I can't see why you would own the original Terra Mystica anymore. Now, I don't think you need to sell Terra Mystica in order to get this one. I don't think there's enough here to warrant selling one and forking out a ton of money for the next. But if you're brand new to the Terra Mystica system, you're basically picking between Gaia Project and this one, I would say. I can't see why you would buy Terra Mystica over this one unless you were able to get it stupidly cheap. But I mean, I'd still want to buy the better version, wouldn't you? So honestly, it's pretty much the same game as Terra Mystica. The fact that they call it innovation is somewhat ironic, because this is not a game that I would consider to be particularly innovative in any way, basically rehashing the previous game and tweaking a few things. But as I said, it's basically what the game is. If you like Terra Mystica, you're gonna like this one. If you like Gaia Project, you're gonna like this one. But I can see that there's just gonna be a little bit of a friendly war in that community with Gaia Project versus Age of Innovation. Which one do you prefer?
We're not so different, you and I.
Age of Innovation certainly has souped up the variety aspect, although it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. We'll get onto the other end of the sword later. But the original Terra Mystica had a decent amount of variety. I mean, you had a ton of faction boards with a specific faction, so lizard folk or mermaids or whatever, I can't remember all the factions, but they were tied to a specific colour, and you still had something like 10 of them in the box, or 8, I can't remember how many, but there was a lot. I think you had 2 for each colour or something, and it was just like, whew, it was a bit insane, certainly with the expansion added, and Gaia Project had a lot as well. Here, the variety's been taken up to 13. It's insane, because first of all, the main thing that I do love is the fact that these factions are now no longer tied to a specific terrain. You have your player board, which will be color-coded to whichever one you end up with, but just because I have the desert terrain as my initial terrain card, which has its own little bonus, doesn't mean I have to play the felines. They're not tied to it. So you shuffle these at random and you get to sort of draft them at the start of the game. And basically, I've got illusionists, navigators, and felines here. Each one with its own kind of insane power and starting setup. But I could be desert illusionist, I could be water illusionist, forest illusionist, lava illusionist, whatever. And the same could happen to felines and navigators. And I've only got 3 here. There's a lot in this box. In terms of starting setup, asymmetry, and different ways to play the game, holy Christ, this one has got a lot, and it certainly does tick my box a lot with regards to how much I like that sort of thing in the game. Unique starting setups and unique ways to play. This one hands down kills the original in that regard. On top of that, you've also got more variety in terms of what technology tracks you're going to do, but also the sheer wealth of competency tiles and innovation tiles you end up with. I mean, this is the competency board. This is only part of the innovation board. The rest of it, I think, is in the box. But you've got a lot of these different tiles that give you different abilities and bonuses if you can acquire them. Same goes for the competency tiles. Same goes for palace tiles. When you build your final palace, that's no longer tied to you. You have now a palace tile that you take for the ability. It's not tied to your faction, which is another bit of variety. That's cool. And then on top, you've got all the bonus tiles that you start the round with, which are definitely different and more varied this time round. There's just so much in the way that you can kind of have a different experience playing this with a different faction to give a new type of strategy or to give a new sort of perk to an engine. Really, really cool in that regard.
The problem is choice.
You're certainly getting a lot for your money as well. I mean, if you can pick this up on a sale, it's definitely worth the money. I mean, at normal RRP cost or typical cost for like a friendly local gaming store, it's not going to be the cheapest game in the world. But if you can pick it online for a really cheap price, then whoa, okay, you're getting a lot in the box. I mean, I've only taken out a fraction of what's in the box here. The box doesn't have an insert, but oh my god, is it like filled with a ton of stuff here. It comes with baggies, so don't worry, but you have got all of these wooden components for every player. You've got all these boards. I mean, you know, there's boards for every faction here. I only took out one, so there's all of these in the box, those lot. The 2 rulebooks, a solo mode, this very colourful board that's double-sided for, you know, smaller group games or the solo mode and bigger group games. You've got all the different factions, these terraform tiles, the purple strepsils. You've got like the wood cubes, you know, here's more of the factions.
There's a police station, fire station, restaurant, service station, and more.
There is a ton of wood and cardboard in this box for your money. You're certainly getting enough pieces in the game. It does make it a little bit of a table hog, although I have seen far worse for a table hog. You know, certainly I've seen games take up far more space with less pieces. This one does a pretty good job of being relatively ergonomic. And on top of that, the pieces don't feel bad quality. I mean, you've got tarot-sized cards. This is good, thick, chunky cardboard for any tile in the game. You know, the thinnest thing probably being the terraform landscapes, and even then they're pretty good. The wood, solid, thick, decent quality, you know, really cool. Really, the only component that sort of does my head in with these games is these purple little strepsils. I mean, they're fine, but man, they're so tiny and so fiddly that I guarantee you're going to lose a few by the time you come to like resell this game or play it after a few times. It's pretty easy for them to fall into the crevices of table leaves or just fall on the floor and get lost for all eternity. And they give you enough in the box, I think, for everybody for that sort of occasion, but yeah, I do wish that they had something a little bit bigger or something a little bit easier to micromanage than these tiny little strepsils. That's like my one bugbear, but otherwise, it's definitely got a lot of pieces. And it looks cool. I mean, the artwork is not stellar. It's not like the best artwork I've ever seen, but compared to the original Terra Mystica, it is insanely more colourful. I mean, you know, you're going to struggle a little bit if you're colorblind, I think. Yes, they have unique illustrations on the hexes for the different tiles, but you're probably going to struggle if you're that colorblind to distinguish some of them. I mean, yes, the water kind of stands out a bit, and so does, I guess, the lava plains, you know, those kind of things. But trying to tell the difference between mountain, desert, and swamp, you know, might be a little bit on the tricky side. So it's definitely heavily color focused, and that might cause a bit of a problem to those type of players. It's certainly a very meaty game as well. If you're into heavy Euro games, this is going to fit the bill. You know, there's plenty of mechanics in here to get you going. There is a ton of options on the table, more on that a little bit later, and certainly it's going to burn the brain cells. You know, you've got a lot that you've got to strategize for in this game, and this game is very much more a strategy game than it is a tactical game. You know, most games I prefer tend to be the tactical ones. This one is more strategic. You need to have a bit of a game plan going forward from the beginning to say, right, this is kind of what I'm aiming for, go for those bonus tiles and such. Yes, there's a bunch of other little things like the competency and the innovation tiles you can grab as you go through, but you generally have some idea of which ones you want to pick up or whether you're going to focus heavily on power or buildings or such and such. This isn't a game that you can switch tactics midway very easily. So if you're into heavy Euro games, it's definitely going to tick that box. There's a lot to get through, and the rules themselves are not terribly complicated. You know, there's certainly a lot of rules to absorb, but there's not as much faff as you would get in some other heavier games. And if you have played Terra Mystica before, then you already know 90% of the rules, which is why it sort of kind of irks me a little bit that this is even made, frankly, and sold as a separate game that's going to have its separate ranking, because so little of this rulebook has got new rules in it that you pretty much are just playing the original game with a few tweaks. Do those tweaks make a difference? I think overall, yes, and I think overall they are better tweaks, But still, it's like you've already released this game 2 times, 3 if you count the tiny Terra Nova one, and now you're basically releasing what is essentially Terra Mystica 1.5, and for a new price tag, and expecting people to, what, ditch the old one and shell out for this one. It's just, that kind of irks me a bit. But that being said, if you have played Terra Mystica, you're going to absorb this very well, and you know, the rules, there's a good amount of appendices, the rules are written fairly well, it's not too difficult, there's a lot of pictorial examples. The main bit in the rules I didn't like, which I think really did need to be sorted, shall we say, is that the setup is a little bit of a chore. The setup takes a while, there's a lot of tiles to sort out, and also there is no picture of a setup diagram in here. So they just give you tiny little pictures for individual elements, but it doesn't give you a setup board for 4 players with all the bits everywhere that you need in a rulebook. That is like rulebook writing 101. A setup diagram of your game should be at the start of the book, and this one doesn't have it. It's very text heavy, so positive and negatives here. It's definitely going to tick the box for a lot of the heavy Euro fans, and if you like strategic games, great. But bear in mind that if you're brand new to Terra Mystica, you'll be able to get this okay, but there are a few blemishes here and there. Now, I've mentioned about options coming up later on, and this game does have a problem with all the options it's giving you. I like having variety in my game, so I like having the starting setups and asymmetry, and I like having cool bonuses that I can grab. There is such a thing as too much though, and this game really does, I think, give too many options during the game. I mean, you now have, on top of all the other stuff that you were doing, all the buildings on your board, which isn't exactly a small amount of buildings. I mean, there's a lot on there, you know, that go into these slots, as well as what you're doing on the board and considering, as well as the underground tiles, as well as the power actions and the things you can do with your power, the bonus tiles you can grab. You now have to somehow think, right, this is what I'm kind of doing for the long game, but then you've also got all these innovation tiles there, all of which are out for review, all these different palace tiles, all the different competency tiles, all of them are on show from the get-go. If you have analysis paralysis and you play this game, you are literally going to die. I think you will just die of heart paralysis because you just will have so many options in this game that you won't be able to compute it all. And even for those who are used to heavy games, there's still just a bit too much on show. You know, maybe I don't want all the powers to be completely random, but maybe they could have just made it a little bit simpler and just had, here's a few bonuses and you can pick which one you want a few times or something. But to have all of these different competency tiles, some of which you need to check the rulebook to make certain how they work because it is all iconography madness here, as well as all the palace tiles and that, it's just a bit too much. Any slow player will drag this game out until the end of time, and it really isn't fun if this game goes above its typical 2.5 hour mark. I mean, if this starts getting to the 3 hour mark, which you can easily do with 4+ players, I'm kind of getting on to the point of really wanting to flip the table at that point. But yeah, you've got a decent amount to think about, but also a fair bit of downtime, and a lot of that is just caused by just having too much on show.
I beg to differ, sir.
This game is also quite a punishing game. It's very unforgiving. If you like games where you can sort of chop and change tactics now and again, or you know, you can pull it back. If you start a little bit bad, you can still pull it back with a few crafty decisions. This game will drive you nuts because this game is very much a strategic game. It's very much a stars must align and plans must go well for you. You will not pull back from a bad start. You need your engine to start well. You only have 6 rounds in the game. That is not a lot of rounds. If you've started off with a bad first round, particularly bad first 2 rounds, you're done. You will not be able to recover. Nothing is going to suddenly catapult you ahead of the person in front if they've already got to lightning speed. And so for 2.5 hours to 3 hours, you're sitting there going through the motions knowing you can't possibly win. And that is a bit of a detractor fun-wise, because I don't necessarily want to win every game, obviously, but I want to stand a chance. I want to feel like I can pull it back if I do something cool. But here, there isn't. You know, you might grab bonus now and again. That feels nice when you grab it, but at the end of the day, you just know that so-and-so over there has basically done better at the start, and it's like, yep, rich get richer, rich get richer, there we go, the poor don't get anything, because it is very much a rich get richer game. You know, you're not going to suddenly get loads of awards for being at the back. No, if you're doing well, you're going to keep doing well, and if you do bad, you're going to stay doing bad. And of course, the theme is still non-existent here. I mean, there is no theme in this game. It is bone dry. You know, you can have all these things like illusionists and navigators and stuff like that, and maybe they've slightly tailored the name to work with a mechanic. I mean, yes, the navigators have got something to do with laying on the coast. Okay, great. What's felines got to do? That's very specific. I mean, you know, what are you going to do with cats? But also just the fact that it's called Age of Innovation and it makes all these references to technology advancing and stuff, and it's like, yeah, but then you still recycled the same 4 tracks from the old game and didn't tweak them at all. I mean, they're called literally after types of things. You've got like commerce and chemistry and engineering or whatever, you know, these are, or law, like these are what they call these tracks. It's yellow, blue, brown, and grey. It literally makes no difference what you call them. You don't have enough theme in this game to warrant giving these names and having all these innovation tiles and all these things named after specific stuff. It's a dry, point salad heavy Euro. Just embrace it. Never! You can also play this solo. There is an automata bot in here, but one of the things about Terra Mystica that does appease to, in a sense, me and other players, is that there is definitely a multiplayer aspect to the area control, because you can build next to each other, get something slightly cheaper, but you got to balance that with other things, and obviously players are going to make more interesting decisions than an automata bot can. Now, this is done by the Automata Factory, so it is a decent, well-designed mode, but it's also a little bit on the rules intensive side. I mean, this is the full rulebook for it, and there's a decent amount that you have to deal with on their turns. Not crazy amounts, I have seen far worse, but you're already trying to absorb everything you do in Terra Mystica, and then you're trying to absorb this on top. It does get a little bit problematic, particularly with regards to where they place things, because you have to, you know, go through quite a few tiebreakers, and it mentions things like the closest, shortest distance to something, or on their terrain priorities and directional selections, and by the time you're calculating that all the time, you are starting to get a little bit weary. But the solo mode is not bad, it's just a little bit of a lot to deal with. You know, this is not a very easy, smooth solo mode. You're gonna be going, right, hang on, I've got to do all this, but hang on, now I've got to do the bot. So flip the card, right, so he does this, but then hang on a minute, so which is closer, that hex or this hex? Am I closer to, oh, hang on a minute, and it says a little bit of extra piloting is required, and I prefer my automators to be sort of more simple AIs, or like, you know, kind of, I get the multiplayer experience in the solo game, which you do in this one. Like I say, I don't think it's entirely bad, but it's just maybe a bit too much for me to contend with. So in Age of Innovation, we have basically Terra Mystica 1.5. Is it an improvement over the original? Yes, I do think that this is better. You know, it's certainly more enjoyable, mainly from the variety standpoint, because the mechanics are exactly the same. I mean, you've added a new currency and a new type of tile you can pick up. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, yes, that's cool, but then again, you can have too much variety on the table for people to have to absorb, and it's just maybe too much prone to analysis paralysis in that regard. But I do like the fact that you have these factions with the different terrains that can be all mixed together with all the different tiles that come out that do create a lot of really cool asymmetric style setups and plays. Using the bonus tiles each round is always good fun. I've liked that aspect in all these Euro games, and you know, there's definitely like room for a lot of different styles of play and a lot of different ways a game can play out based on what faction combinations are there. That has always been a highlight of Terra Mystica. It's been improved component-wise, it's been improved color-wise. You know, colorblind people maybe stay away, but it's definitely a bit more visually impressive on the table. I do wish that they'd actually try to, I don't know, maybe innovate a little bit more and actually try to inject a little bit of theme in here, or do something a bit more interesting with these tracks. I mean, you literally just had Gaia Project do the same thing with the tracks. So why couldn't you have introduced something like Gaia Project had in this one? Or were you too afraid that you were going to make this game so similar or so much better than the other two that the other two suddenly become this thing and they won't buy Gaia Project anymore? Maybe. That seems about right. But yeah, I mean, the technology tracks are still boring. Here, you level them up and you do a little bit on here and it gets you a few points and stuff, and it's like, and it unlocks a tile. But other than that, this is just a track. It's a bunch of tracks, whoop-de-doo. So, you know, they've improved in some aspects, but in most of it, it is just basically the same game. And I'd already waned off the original Terra Mystica after a bit. This one isn't enough to suddenly bring me back. Would I still play it? Yes. You know, I still get some enjoyment out of it, but I'm going to play it every now and again. It's not something I want to play super often. It's, you know, in favor of more thematic, interesting sort of Euro games. You know, it's It's got some player interaction, but for the most part, it's simply just whether you build next door to somebody in the game. Other than that, it's mostly solitaire, so you might as well play the solo mode, but then that's got a lot to deal with. So there's a lot of good things here, but there's also plenty of stuff that sort of rubs me the wrong way or just, you know, isn't as great. And I can't give it that many props for basically rehashing the same idea. You know, I know some reviewers are very forgiving of this, you know, where they go, oh, it's the same thing we've had before. Well, 10 out of 10. It's like, no. If you're going to redo the same game, you've got to knock it out of the park. You got to bring something a little bit new to the table. You can't just reprint it with some extra gloss and an extra bunch of tiles. It's like, you got to do a bit more than that. So, Age of Innovation is fine, but I'm only really going to give it a 6 out of 10. I say only, that's still above average. It's still a game that's decent, it's fine. I could play this every now and again, but it's not one that I want to keep or seek out. I still think that it's just too similar to the original. Like, you know, if you own the original and you already enjoy that, then you don't really need this one. You don't need to spend all that money. Chances are some people are going to prefer Gaia Project to this one because of the technologies being a bit more interesting and space themes just being more interesting than this. But if you're brand new to Terra Mystica, then this one could still be a good one to pick up as your first outing for it. But yeah, I was just hoping for a bit more, I don't know, actual innovation. Was that too much to ask?
We're sorry.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the site. Follow the link in the description, get the thumbs on that Board Game Geek listing, and make it stand out in the hot reviews section. Don't forget to check out all the other stuff I've been doing. Oh my god! All the Essen reviews I've been doing, everyone that I've been doing previously, and the ones that are yet to come. Be sure to check out those and let me know your thoughts. Get your thoughts in the comments about this game. I'm sure there's plenty of you that are absolute 10 out of 10 fans of this game. I'm sure there's some of you that didn't necessarily gel with this one. You know, do you feel that this one is so much better than the original Terra Mystica that it warrants like a new printing? Or are you going to go still stick with Gaia Project or the original Terra Mystica? I'd be interested to at least know that. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether you want to make the world look like your desert hellscape or not, it's still only a game. So bye for now, everyone.